Meantime, China's pharmaceutical industry is expanding production capacity in a bid to produce as many as 5 billion doses of the vaccine by the end of next year. The country's vaccine diplomacy program could help it win influence with developing countries. But first, it will have to prove its formulas meet international health standards. Joining me now live is our Asia Correspondent Adrian Brown. Adrian, great to see you. The vaccine diplomacy has been quite obvious from the beginning from China, but there's still a few issues with it, aren't there?
That's right. The best known of the Chinese vaccines is Sinovac. But the problem with Sinovac is we have received data, that's to say we, the World Health Organization, on the first two of its trials, but not on the third. And that information still hasn't been released. We're not sure when it's going to come. And that's the problem. That's the hesitation that the world has with the Chinese vaccine. We know so far that it has an efficacy rate of about 50%. The other advantage or disadvantage of Sinovac is that it can be stored at very low temperatures. That's a big selling point. It can be stored at basically fridge temperature, which is a big advantage to people in developing countries. But it's not so attractive to people in other parts of the world. But, it has to be said that, that there is this big divide between rich countries that can afford to get things like the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine and poorer countries that will simply take what they are given. Case in point is the Philippines. At the moment, the Philippines is involved in a maritime standoff with China that is widening, but China has just delivered 600,000 doses of the Sinovac vaccine to Manila. So it's going to be very difficult for Manila to keep up its criticism over China's policies in the South China Sea because it's dependent on China for that vaccine.
Adrian, how effective is this vaccine diplomacy? Because here in Australia, we often do talk about it and do the reporting around China's influence in the Pacific. But the rest of the world knows that wherever the virus came from, it came out of China. Perhaps not a lab, perhaps the wet market. But how much damage has that done to China's reputation and therefore its vaccine diplomacy?
Well, as we said before, Laura, I think China wants to be remembered not as the country where the virus was first identified in Wuhan, but as the country that did so much to, save the world by providing, millions of vaccines to the world. You mentioned in your introduction that China is hoping to produce something like 5 billion doses of its vaccines by the end of next year. Well, it's also planning to inoculate 70% of its country by the end of this year and to provide getting on for 1 billion more doses to the world before the end of this year. At the moment, China is still not allowing people to go into its country who have received vaccines other than the Chinese vaccine. But I think that's going to have to change because, next year China is hosting the 2022 Winter Games. And of course, athletes going to China will have received vaccines largely produced by European, US, and also Russian manufacturers.
And what about their quiet, well, not so quiet, really, incursion into Hong Kong? Is that bubbling along as it has been in previous weeks? We haven't checked in with you with that in a while.
Well, we saw on Friday some of Hong Kong's best-known pro-democracy figures were convicted for taking part in a peaceful protest in 2019. They included Jimmy Lai, of course, and he's facing, in addition to that, 3 more charges under the draconian national security law. So I think whatever way you look at it, Jimmy Lai is facing the prospect of, the rest of his life in jail, and he is 73 years old. Almost the entire leadership of the pro-democracy camp have now either found themselves in jail, under arrest, or have fled the country in exile. China has essentially made it clear that anyone voicing criticism of the country, of its political system, runs the risk of finding themselves in the same position. Yeah. I mean, the court case we saw on Friday, of course, is just the beginning. There are hundreds of court cases going on almost every day in Hong Kong. There is a court case involving somebody who took part in the protests in 2019 and 2020, and they are going to go on for months if not years.